All right. So thank you very much, Tammy. And again, thank you guys for being here. Thanks to the plenary session, like the organizing committee, for helping us get all this information together. It's a lot of work to kind of pull these ideas together and come up with a theme. And we have a lot of fun doing that every year. And when we get together and we go through this idea of themes, we try to start like thinking about who are the people that we want to bring forward for our plenary sessions, who are the people that we want to hear from who can bring that expertise to us. And along that way, we find a lot of new faces that we can bring forward, as well as some seasoned faces, as Nazim was referring to earlier. And you will see some new and some seasoned faces here today. But our first new face to us at Manitoba Agronomist Conference is Todd Ormann. And so Todd is going to speak with us this morning to kind of really set the stage too, talking about his personal learnings in ag tech, titled The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I'm very, very curious to see what that good, bad, and ugly is going to look like. So Todd is the Vice President of Development at Olds College. And is leading the advancement and partnering with marketing teams that implement and the promotion, do the promotion of college strategic relationships with industry donors and sponsors. A lot of these are ag tech companies that he's worked with, and he's worked in a lot of ag tech in the past as well. So he's got tons of experience to bring to the table. So while he's a new face to us here, I would say he's then seasoned, maybe not as seasoned as others yet, right? Yeah, exactly. So Todd, welcome to the stage, and we look forward to hearing what you have to bring to us today.
It's been a while actually since I've been in front of an audience like this. Actually, it reminds me of a time I went down to Brazil. But maybe before I start this story, anyone a Catholic in this audience? Okay, I may offend you. Anybody a lawyer in this audience? Okay, we're safe there. So I was down in São Paulo, and the Minister of Ag had an audience just like this, and he started his presentation off with this story. I guess a conference very much like this, the Pope and the Vatican lawyer had went to, and unfortunately they got in a car accident before the conference started. Now, the lawyer passed away maybe 2 or 3 seconds before the Pope did. So when they get up to the pearly gates, St. Peter is waiting for them. So St. Peter greets the lawyer and says, you've been an unbelievable lawyer for us. We've had lots of challenges down on earth, but you've managed them with grace. And to be honest, we're in a much better place because of you. So if you look up in the hill, you'll see that's very large mansion, the one with the tennis courts and the fountains and the pool. That is yours. Please enjoy your time here in heaven. Thank you for your service. So off he goes. He's quite happy. He sees his new place for the rest of his life and eternity. And up comes the Pope. Now, the Pope, St. Peter greets him and says, you've been an excellent Pope. I think our flock has grown by about 4% annually by the time you're here on earth. We're looking really good. The treasury's good. Life is good. Now, for you, if you look over in the hill there, you see that nice 900 square foot house with the nice green grass and the single car garage. That is all yours. I hope you enjoy your time up here, Pope. You've been a great emissary for us. Pope, St. Peter says, look, I don't want to be ungrateful, but I'm the Pope. And that was our lawyer. He was a key guy down there. And St. Peter says, well, look, we got lots of popes up here, but that's our first lawyer. Okay, hope the rest of my presentation is better than that. So to start off, let me give it a background of who I am and who I'm not. You're going to have a lot of speakers come up, and they are going to have a lot more technical chops than what I have. I am an ag guy, and I've got on my slide there 45 years of experience. That includes starting at 10 when I'm delivering meals to the field. I've been an Aggie, grew up on a farm in southern Alberta, been in it all my life. For 37 years, I've actually had a paycheck in ag where I've actually had a tax return. And my experience has actually been pretty diverse. Now, I'm more of a social scientist. So I've been in this area of agronomy, sold chemicals, sold seed, sold ag tech, developed this stuff globally. But I'm not going to be the guy that's going to tell you all the details around soil science and diseases and insects. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that social side of technology, because a lot of times it's one of the areas, quite candidly, we ignore. Now, I've been on various lists and I've done various things, and you can see by technical background, I'm an economist. That's what my master's in, is in ag economics. But I've been a farmer. I've run the ag division for UFA. I've had 800 people reporting to me. I'm right now a VP of development for Olds College. I helped create TELUS Ag, which is a global company. A lot of experience. But the other thing I get characterized as is a disruptor. So I've made lists, right? And one of the lists I made was a top 50 influential Aggies in Canada. And it's because I've done things like rationalize and closed elevators. I have created digital systems for program management, some of the earlier ones, and I've created a lot of ag tech. But all those things, to be honest, are much more around the social marketing and sales aspect. And those are things I think you always got to think about when you think about technology. So my presentation is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because in this career, I'd love to tell you it's been really smooth sailing, but there's been a lot of probably a little bit more bad and ugly as there has been good. So I'm hopefully giving you guys a bit of insights into ag tech, how it's adopted by going through this. So first, the good. Now, there are a lot of quotes I kind of like looking at, and I think this is one of the ones I enjoy. I enjoy a lot of those quotes that you hear from Albert Einstein, right? So I fear the day that technology will surpass the human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots. Now, this conference a little bit alluded to that. Can AI replace the agronomist? And when you look at the world of venture capitalism and where people are investing in technology, to be candid, I think that is exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for the day where, because quite honestly, people are expensive and they're less controllable. And so technology, if we can get to that point, is what we're being driven to. So having said that, on the good, I want to talk about TELUS. So one of the most interesting things I did in my career was help start TELUS Ag. So I started on a team of 4 as the first ag guy in TELUS. So this is about 2017, 2018. And when I went to TELUS, a lot of my friends and colleagues asked me if I was leaving ag. But no, I was actually there to help start this division for this telco. Now, what a lot of people don't know about TELUS, it's about a $14, $15 billion company. And they've had the same CEO for about 18 to 19 years. And his name is Darren Entwistle. And Darren does not see TELUS as a telco. He sees it as an ag tech company, or a tech company, sorry. A tech company that has social purpose. So he's not going to go after the Microsoft and the Googles, because that's a crazy, crazy ambition. But he's looking for those things that have social purpose. So TELUS itself has about 90 to 100,000 people. And what a lot of people don't know is that most of those staff are not here in Canada. There's about 25,000. The rest of them are either in the US, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Central America and Asia. And they've developed other divisions like TELUS International and TELUS Health that are basically tech plays. So TELUS Health actually manages more data than any other person in Canada around health records. And they did that through about 13 acquisitions over about 11-year period. And they stitched together that ability to take data from your pharmacy into the hospital, into the emergency rooms, and all those places. And that was all through acquisitions. They did a very similar play on the international side. They started as a call center management and then started buying a bunch of software as a service companies and now do a lot of work for Google and Fitbit and you name it. On ag, they had the same premise. They wanted to look at the social nature of what food is going to do for society. So first off, and I want to stress this point, as Aggies, we kind of see ourselves in this little bubble and that we're driving our own world. I think this is an interesting case study where quite candidly, an urban brand, an urban perspective is coming into ag, but they're coming in not because they're looking at how they grow more things or raise animals better. They're looking at the social purpose that they think that people want to know where their food comes from. And they feel that there is an environmental play here. So we are going to come in and do a very similar thing to what they did on the health side. And so our business case was to think about agribusiness, agri-food, and then basically finally a final piece of consumer utilization of data, and try to stitch those together. So over a period of 4 or 5 years, we spent more money. Like I've been in ag all my life. This company spent more money in the space of agriculture than any company I worked for. In that time period, it starts with the B, is the amount of money that we actually spent. I worked for Syngenta, I worked for UFA. No one else spent that kind of money that quickly. And so that does tell you how significant ag is and technology is going to be for an urban audience going forward, and the influence that goes in this space. Now, on this slide, I bought Farm at Hand, TKXS, invested in Hummingbird, acquired Decisive, made some work on Muddy Boots in Britain, helped get ag integrated out of Pennsylvania, introduced them to TKXS, Feedlot Health. Again, I was an extremely busy person over that time period. And even compared to FieldView or Climate and Zarvio, this company here, this TELUS Ag and Consumer Good, it's now called, is actually profitable. Not as profitable as TELUS wants it to be, but they are profitable. So at the end of the time, when I left 2 years ago, I started, there was a team of 4. But when I had left, we had 1,500 team members. We were active in 50 different countries. We had staff in 10. We had over 6,600 customers. Again, it just shows you how much money and focus was going into this space. Now, having said that, quote that quote from Albert Einstein. Really, a lot of times when we were looking at buying companies and investing in companies, we were looking for the software as a service model. That model is much more expandable. It's easier to do in terms of software. So if you think about, you put money down, you pay for it every month, you can grow that. So those are the type of companies that we were looking for, and we're looking for always that technology. But if I think about those technologies that really were, and companies that were successful, it was not necessarily companies where the tech was first and that we had service. It was companies that, quite candidly, were more still service-oriented companies that were using technology. So 4 brands I've got up there that were probably really, really significant, and quite honestly, I think are still driving the bottom line within TELUS Ag. So the most significant one was Feedlot Health. Now, these aren't agronomists, but these are vets. And vets, basically a gentleman by the name, and probably one of the more smartest people I've ever met was a gentleman by the name of Key Jim. Key is an exceptionally influential person. And what they did was they basically were veterinarians that went to feedlots, and they wanted to measure the effect of drugs and feed in the feedlot. And they created software around that. And now today, 40% of all the cattle in Canada going through a feedlot is in this system. 20% of the North American herd is in this system. Key Jim himself owns 7% of that herd. And this, again, I think it's key to here to understand the value proposition to those feedlots is not the software. The value proposition still is that veterinarian and that vet tech that's using the software. That's what's driving the success of that business. TKXS is a very similar type of company. Now, back in my day, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I used to run program management, collect data for programs. TKXS is a company out of North Carolina and Raleigh that basically works with Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva, and all the big players, and they collect data, and they collect that data to manage programs. Now, how Bayer does this program, how Syngenta does this program, and Corteva does their program, they're all different. And so the real uniqueness here is not so much around the technology, the software that does this, but honestly, they know exactly how that US retail system works. They know exactly how Bayer works, Corteva works, and Syngenta works, and Dow, and they develop their programs specifically around that. So even though this is an amazing tech company, it is still very, very dependent upon knowledge of the customer, knowledge of that interaction of that overall go-to-market piece, and that's what's driving it. Ag Integrated, another good example. So Ag Integrated was out of Pennsylvania. So the thought was once we bought all these companies, we're going to have to move data back and forth. Ag Integrated did a lot of API development. So they would be able to take data from controller files and they're going to connect that to the various pieces. And they basically did piece by piece, pipe by pipe. But again, it sounds like it was a real strong data play, but no, they knew exactly who to talk to in Deere to get this done. They knew exactly how to talk to and all the software pieces to get this done. And each of these projects was not really scalable. It was project by project. So again, I found it interesting that what made Ag Integrated successful was not the technology as much as their knowledge about how that market worked. Decisive is another good example. Now, Decisive is still pretty early, and I work for Farmer's Edge. So, we battled it out back when we were in the field together. But where Decisive added value and where we actually, when you looked at the product line, it was actually at a margin that was actually driving profitability, was when they were actually interfacing with the customer. So when they had a strong relationship with the customer and they were creating prescriptions for that unique customer, they knew the land and they could talk through that piece with them. That's what really drove the profitability. And then guys were willing to pay $6 to $7 an acre. A lot of these, like in ag, I think the other thing people, and it was a bit of a learning for TELUS, this is never going to be a game of numbers. There's less and less farms. And so it's always more of a game around share of acre or share of wallet. So you try to get in with a customer and you try to grow that piece out. And so when you have the relationship, that's what drives it. So I just wanted to bring this up because even though when we started with TELUS, I wanted to just drive the point home. One, don't kid yourself, guys. Urban brands and that outside urban world is going to have an influence here. The other thing to note is that even though a lot of people, and we're going to have these conversations around technology, it is still going to be really people oriented. So now let's look at some of the bad. I love this quote. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, Henry Ford. Now, there's debate whether Henry Ford actually said that. But I think this is really good insight because in my career, everyone says, go talk to the customer and listen to the customer. But I think, to be honest, you should always talk to that customer and listen to the customer, but do not take what they say as gospel. Look at their actions and understand where they want to go. That's the more important insight. And Henry Ford is right. If he would have just asked customers without any understanding of what an automobile is, they would have simply said faster horses. But he understood the fact that it was about transportation, getting places faster and everything else, and that's what brought the automobile about. So in my career, and I'm an old guy, I don't know if you guys, all you people would actually recognize some of these brands, but I got some good examples of where the customer said one thing, but their actions suggested something else. So right off the bat, I started my career here in Manitoba with a company called American Cyanamid. I was a sales rep. I had North Dakota DePaw. And back in the day, you had to do complaints. And if you wanted to learn about customer behavior, walk out into the field that you potentially have just destroyed, right? And they, back also in those early days, the rule of thumb was you're going to try to get back 1% to 3%. And I can remember my boss telling me, look, whenever you go out into the field, you always take your vehicle and you drive out there because if you don't, you may be walking back, right? And it was in Ethelbert, Manitoba. I had a complaint. And so back in this is the now early days of liquid herbicide. And I sold things like Avenge and Assert. And Avenge could be a little bit hot in the crop. And so you kind of waited a week before you went and did that complaint because it'll kind of grow out. Assert, you were almost guaranteed if they sprayed after the 4-leaf stage of the wild oat, it was going to escape, right? So anyways, we had some bad weather. I get a call and I'm supposed to go out to this farm. And you guys know how farmyards are, right? They've got trees all around them. And as I walk into this yard or drive into this yard, I notice it's not a pickup, it's about 15 pickups. And I get in there, and sure enough, the farmer that was giving the complaint didn't just call me, he called all his neighbors as well. And so I got a gang of people basically waiting for me. And I get into the yard, and he says, "We're going to go look at my fields." And they are much bigger than I am. And I still remember I didn't get a choice. He throws me into this pickup truck, and two big guys to the point that I'm in the middle. I can't sit back in the seat because they're too friggin' big. So I'm leaning on the dash, and they got their shotguns on the thing there, right? So as we go out in the field, I look at the field and I stroke a lot of checks that day, right? So that basically how I manage it. Now, the reason I bring that story up is a lot of people think that when you did complaints like that, it was always going to be about your product had to work, and if it worked, life is good. The truth was, when I dealt with complaints, they all knew quite candidly too hot, too cold, and what it worked. If you manage that complaint right, I had customers for life. My best customers were almost always the people that complained, because almost every farmer had an issue. And so it's more important to figure out how to deal with that piece. And so when they're selling it, they have to have something that works really well. That wasn't really what was driving them. What they wanted was support. If you figured out how to do that support, you're always going to have a customer back. Now, similar story, United Grain Growers. This is a grain company back in the day. And I had one of those fun jobs. I have a master's in agricultural economics. And so they made me an area manager in my 20s. So I managed a group of about 70 people in my 20s. And at this time, if you look back at the history of those grain companies, back in the day, you bled blue if you're United Grain Growers, you bled green if you were a pool person. You know, that's who you were. If you brought the, grain elevator managers into the bar in the evening, you almost expected fistfights. Like they lived and breathed that. I had staff that had generations. Their grandfather's a grain buyer, their father was a grain buyer. That's how that world worked. But in those late 90s, we went through a massive restructuring. We shut down Prairie Elevators. We, basically destroyed that system, which was very much a people's system, right? Now, I would have to go into the town, and I'd bring the biggest sales rep I had with me to basically talk to the local community about closing that elevator. And they would sit there and they would tell me, "I'm never going to do business with you again." Now, the truth was, though, once we had the unit trains, we had an incentive. And if we had a good freight rate, I could move grain and pay them 5 to 10 cents more a bushel quite easily and actually put it on a truck for them. And at the end of the day, those same people that were, criticizing closing that elevator down, they were coming across, because the real driver for that group was, at the end of the day, it was still, they were business people. And so they were making their decisions, and more as farmers got larger, more complex on this area of business versus that coffee shop. And again, it comes down to listening. If I listened to just what those customers said, we would have kept all those elevators open. But the truth was, that's not what was going to drive their business long term. And there's we went. Now, the other one, this was my first foray into tech, was data management. So back in the day, we started here actually in Manitoba with a struggle of trying to get fungicides to be utilized on crops. And we had a product called Tilt, or Proconazole, that just was not going to get utilized. What kicked it off is we created a program where I think you got 50% back if you bought so much. That's what initiated program management. And then we got a little bit more sophisticated, and we started collecting the data from the retailers to do this. And what you would notice is things like, if a farmer was buying products, he'd buy products from one guy 70%, but there was always two others that he kind of balanced it off. And then you'd see that over 3 or 4 years, they would move between this. So we started looking at the data and started saying, well, you know what? These farmers are buying $200,000 to $300,000 worth of stuff off us every year. Maybe we should start knowing who they are. So we went more direct to them. Now, at the same time, if you guys remember, a lot of you guys are too young for this, but there was lots of noise that programs were just not popular, that we should kill programs. But every time we looked at the data, we see higher retention rates the more they were on programs. we've seen an increase in brands, the more they were on programs. And confidentially, some larger farmers would say, yeah, you know what? I should get a little bit more because I'm buying more off of you. So again, that what people were saying versus what they were actually doing was completely different. So programs became a really crucial part of how Syngenta went to market. That data drove a lot of change in our go-to-market from basically mass advertising to, no, we're going to hire people to go directly out because we can influence the market. And these customers of size and scale that it doesn't make sense just to do advertising anymore. It makes more sense to put a rep on the road and get out there. So I just say again, what people are saying versus what they actually do are two different things. Now let's talk about a little bit the ugly. So another stat or another quote, sorry, that I kind of like. There are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Right? So you can, this is a Mark Twain quote, you can utilize numbers to say a lot of things if you can create the right story, and a lot of things are going to look around data. Now, in my career, one of the things I did was I worked for this company called Farmer's Edge. Now, I don't know, I think, have everyone heard of Farmer's Edge here in the room? Yeah. So sometimes I say that people spit on the floor. It's like, I don't know sometimes if I should tell people I work for Farmer's Edge or not, but I'll be honest with you, it was one of these things where companies I worked with that I probably learned more in the 2 to 3 years I was there than any other company because we were moving so fast, right? Now, our CEO was a gentleman by the name of Wade Barnes. I met Wade Barnes from United Grain Growers. He was an agronomist actually in near Dauphin, Manitoba, and that was my introduction to him. And so I got recruited by Wade and a former boss from Syngenta to come into this company, and I was the VP of product. And the intent of this product was kind of like that first quote that I had. The idea was, look, you had an agronomist could go out and manage about 30,000 acres, put them on a quad, get out there, physically look at things. But what if you could change that to 300,000 acres? By not putting them on a quad and going out there, but utilizing imagery and data and models to basically make that work. That was the intent of this, right? The idea really was to, over time, replace people and do systems. Now, the truth of this, though, was we moved way too fast, way too quickly. Because the other nature of when you're doing a company like this is that, again, venture capitalism tries to drive things from, you got to be expand really fast. And they were looking at models like, you know, people that were invested like Kleiner Perkins were looking at things like Facebook and Google and all those things that were expandable. So we needed to move really, really fast. So we had data and we had systems probably well in place and good service in Western Canada, but we moved from Western Canada to the US, to Russia, to Brazil, to Australia in a space of 2 years. Now, that model that worked in Western Canada did not work in the Ukraine-Russia area very well. It did not work in Mississippi. You know, a weather station that we could set up in Southern Alberta or, you know, which could not, again, work in some of those states areas because there was no connectivity. But that was the overall goal on this. And what drove this, again, was venture capital and as money. Like Wade was an interesting gentleman. A key, 1 year we won on this front. Like we were Technology of the Year at the World Economic Forum. And Wade could sit down with Al Gore and have a conversation with Al Gore. And then 2 weeks later, we could put him into Kansas and he could sit and talk to an agronomist. He was an amazing salesman and he knew exactly how to position it. And that's what drove this engine. It really wasn't as much about good agronomics and good customer service, because for us to survive, we needed to get the next level of pitch. So we continue to do that and we continue to drive. And the intent here again was to look at data, have data replace people. But the truth was we weren't ready for that and the technology wasn't ready for that yet. And so again, some people can say what they can about Farmer's Edge, but it did pave the way for a lot of other ag tech companies. And what was interesting in this time period as well was in my career also, it always had been the big companies driving everything, right? So it was the Bears, the Cortevas, the Deeres, and everything else. And what you've seen is a consolidation of industry into a lot of these big companies. The cool time about this period, and again, it was only 4 or 5 years ago, right? Was that it started up a lot of little ag tech companies. And those little ag tech companies, they did influence where the market's going today. Now you see a correction in the market. You do see that venture capital and that has kind of decreased, but I don't care who you're talking to in terms of one of these large companies, they all have a tech play. Now, I don't know if FieldView is going to be a standalone company like at first thought or Zarvio with BASF, but they are very much integrated. And if you look at equipment sales today, they advertise and promote themselves on data and data systems. So this is not going away. It's only going to become bigger and bigger in there. And yes, there was a lot of ugly, at my time at Farmer's Edge, but it did have a significant impact on where the market is and where the market's going today. So today I work at Olds College. The nice thing about Olds College is I get to wear boots and I get to wear jeans, and I'm 5'6", so it always helps that I get to wear boots. So I do kind of like that. But I still get to play a lot with technology. My role is one that I interact with a lot of our strategic partners. We have a smart farm, and I've done a lot of stuff in industry, so I still get connected with that. Now, the college itself has been fairly successful. And actually, it says on there ranked as one of the top 10, but as of last week, we were number 4 in the country for research for colleges. And we do nothing but ag research. And you can see, we've interacted with over 263 companies. Most of those are SMEs. And we have about 50 to 75 different projects always ongoing. And they range everything from soil sensors from Crystal Labs to robotics to data sensors. So I enjoy my time at Olds College because again, it is honestly nice to be where you're looking at public good. There is some niceness to be working for a public institution like Olds College. But one of the other stories I think that's relevant here is this. This is the Omni platform. So the Omni platform, or they used to call it as DOT, is an interesting platform. So the other thing I think people should recognize why it's important that in Canada, we are still thinking about how we fund projects like this. Now, in the world of ag, and I was at one time a portfolio manager for North America for Syngenta, for cereals. It's not a border thing. It's not a US-Canada thing. It's about what's the largest market. And when I was at Syngenta, it became pretty clear that my best friends were the guys in the Southern Field Crops because, they had 20 million acres of cotton and we had 20 million acres of canola. We were both in the same boat. Those guys that managed corn and beans, they called the shots. That's how technology developed. So when you think about technology and the equipment side, the Deere equipment first is always going to come out around corn. Things like the air seeder and those pieces are developed by entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan that are unique. And then maybe if there's enough market, they're going to get picked up. So this platform, was started by Seedmaster in Saskatchewan and is a really unique concept. And it's a good example of that entrepreneurial spirit that comes from Saskatchewan. So what they did here is they replaced the cab. There's no cab. And what they've also did is they replaced the implement. They combined the tractor and the implement all together. It's a U-shaped platform. It's got a diesel cat engine. And then it kind of connects to your seeder, connects to your sprayer, and it's a robotic platform. And for 4 years, we ran this. And the other thing I should also say is, so because technology is driving a lot of this space, Seedmaster sold it to Raven. Raven got bought by CNH. So now this is a CNH platform. And if you look at this space, Deere is way ahead. They've been doing this since the 90s. And so their technology, honestly, is it's very mature and works really well. And to catch up, CNH buys Raven. And recently, AGCO bought Trimble. So that's how they're trying to catch up. Now, so for 4 years, we had this platform on our farm, and we did all our seeding, all our spraying with it, and it worked really well. From a labor perspective, it saved labor. If you think about seeding, you have a bum in the seat seeding, you got another bum going out there and basically getting fertilizer and chem. We eliminated one of those bums. It clearly worked. And the challenges wasn't software or anything else. It was things like plug nozzles and everything but the software was the real challenge with this, right? The gentleman that did a lot of the research, Yevgen, he is a Ukrainian and has to go back and forth still to Ukraine to teach drones for the military. So at times, Yevgen was seeding the farm from the Ukraine. So, and it was a cool thing to always bring. I brought lots of guests to the college and talk about it, and it was always cool to show them and talk about this. You know how robotics was either going to be small or large. I mean, we even did projects where we took one of those with a conventional piece of equipment. The conventional piece of equipment worked really well in the straight and narrows, but the headlands were tight. This worked better. So you could again have one bum in a seat, and then this kind of going beside it. But as of recent, Raven or CNH told us they're not going to go forward with this. Not because it doesn't work, it's too much of a step change. Farmers today are invested in a tractor and an implement. For them to give up a tractor and implement is just a little bit too much. They feel it's probably better to basically get the overall equipment that they have today and maybe 5 to 10 years get here. So again, it's not a question of what's good from a technology perspective, it's what works from a people perspective. So one final slide. Now, it's nowhere near as cool of a quote as the other ones I had, but myself personally feel that it's service with technology, not technology with service, that really drives the adoption and utilization, because we're still a people industry. You know, we still work with trusted advisor. The average farmer, so I'm 56 years old. I'm average age for a farmer. We've done a really good job of teaching farmers agronomy and animal husbandry, but they're not really well schooled in data and data science. And so you still need somebody to interact with them. Most farmers have big fat thumbs like me, and they aren't going to be entering data. In fact, if you talk to some of these companies, they'll tell you that what's the number one variety seeded? A 1 or an A, you know, or what's sprayed. It's because they're not putting the data in. Now, when you do have a trusted advisor in the farm that they're working with them, those farms are utilizing those systems to a T, and there's lots of value in that. So to that end, I still feel that the real role of agronomy and everything else is still going to be use these tools, but they are tools. They're not yet replacements. Now, there is a caveat on this, and that's part of the conference here that we're going to talk about, and that's AI. Now, AI for me is, makes me a little nervous, because when I did program management and we did some of those modeling for Farmer's Edge, data architecture became really, really important. So, for example, one of the cool things I thought we did with Farmer's Edge, we did do some real machine learning. So the idea with Farmer's Edge was that, once you had a weather station out there, a CAN plug in this system, and satellite imagery, well, you did soil sampling, you could then model out what the soil changed going forward. And then we would just every 4 years do it. And we had a machine learning algorithm that drove that. So it wasn't AI, it was machine learning. And my CTO would tell me that that thing was picking up correlations of pieces of data that we don't know what they were, but it was more accurate. So it was be able to pull that together, right? But it was really key that we had enough data and that data set to drive that. And again, when we went into Mississippi or whatever, you couldn't do that. It was a mechanistic model, so you had to kind of pull the data in. But today, and it's amazed at how far AI has come, just to your guys' chat GBT comment there earlier, in such a short time period. And the data set that it seems to work on is the written word. There's a lot of the written word out there to pull off the net. The challenge with that, there's a lot of things out there that is not necessarily accurate. And I can guarantee you big companies and venture companies are going to continue to put a lot of money into that because it's going to be a lot cheaper to run it that way. And so the other nuance about technology is that when you look at seed and chemistry and iron, it comes out cooked to the farm. That's not how technology is developed. It's through a system called agile development. So you almost purposely bring out beta or MVP products out to the marketplace. It doesn't work, and then you fix it. It goes back into the cycle, Scrum Master takes it and goes back forward. That's how technology gets better, and that's how they're going to utilize AI. So I am worried a little bit because if I've looked at some of the recent stuff on AI, it's pretty believable. When you see people and you see Chat GPT respond back, I can see it complementing, and I can see cheaper systems because of it. So today, I still think, and there will always be a place for an agronomist to take multiple technologies, but don't kid yourself. We will see more and more AI coming forward. So that's my presentation. I hope that worked for you. I hope I didn't turn you off with my joke or offended anybody at the beginning. But thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Todd. Does anybody have any questions in the room here? We are going to have a Q&A at the end today, but yeah. Okay. So the question, just for everyone online too could hear, the question is about urban brands and whether or not urban brands kind of getting involved are going to be helpful or kind of a hindrance to the system.
I don't think we have a choice. Right? I wish we could ask that question and say we could control that, but again, I should talk about TELUS because TELUS again is a good example of a brand that you're not going to think about coming in, investing very heavily. If I look, 1.7% of our population today is connected to primary agriculture. The voice of ag today is smaller than ever. And even at the college, I interact a lot with policymakers, ag Senate committee, those type of people come through. They don't have an ag background. And so their perceptions of ag is what you see in that urban world. They're going to come with a mindset much more like TELUS than most. And so this room probably has a really good understanding about the reality, but that's not the case. So we should expect that decisions in this space are not always going to be made for the practical, real reasons of why it should, but by perceptions of what's driving things outside of the world of ag.
Okay, so just a quick question about what you mean by an urban brand. And then the other question that I have is with TELUS making multiple tech acquisitions across all spaces in ag, they are moving to data collection in all production steps. Who owns the data, which is a great question, and how is TELUS using the macro collected in through all production steps?
So when we speak about urban, and I shouldn't say just even urban, but I say the urban population, I've always in my mind, I segment rural and urban. So, I grew up in a rural area. I'm in agriculture in my life. I'm a farm kid. Most people do not have my background now coming into agriculture. And so if I look at someone that's grown up in a population of 5 to 10,000, it's not been directly on a farm, that's kind of what I'm talking about. And we should expect that those perceptions that are coming from that world are very different than it's someone that's grown up in it. And you may say it's wrong, but it doesn't really matter. Those perceptions are going to be driving a lot of investment into policy decisions in the world of agriculture. So just even on that front, I do see the utilization of these tools. I know this audience is probably thinking about how you use those tools to basically make better agronomic decisions. I could see very easily the adoption of these tools, not because of that, but because there's a perception that we are polluting and that we need to control ag, that ag is using fertilizer and chemistry and genetics in a more proper way, and thus they have to report it. That's how urban world may want to look at it versus how an ag world may want to look at it. And the other one was about data, right?
Yeah, so TELUS, the data collection, who owns the data, and then how is that being collected through all the production steps and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So right now, even like, again, it could have changed. I've been out of TELUS now for 2 years, but every one of those companies had a little bit of their own little data pieces. So for example, when you're looking at TKXS, it wasn't their data, it was Bear's data or Syngenta's data, right? Now, the only thing I can say on that, this is a tricky question because the only way those systems get better is the aggregation of data. So individual data really isn't all worth all that much. It's what the derivative product comes from when you pull that data together and you create disease, insect models, and AI. And so almost all of these companies will have some kind of data piece that allows you to aggregate it. And when I was at Syngenta, we basically, the reason you signed up on a program was to allow us to collect the data. And it also allowed us to market it. But to be honest, I never had, and I would do 16 to 17,000 checks a year, didn't have a single customer come back to me and say, do not give me a check. So if the data is utilized in the right way and there's actual good purpose for it, I find that the farming population accepts it. But there's always going to be a trust issue around data because in some cases, it hasn't been utilized.